Michael, please, can we not do this tonight? He sighed, that deep, tired sigh that lately seemed to follow him around like a shadow. I traced a crack in the worn table, the same table where we'd giggled over cheap wine on our second date, where he'd fumbled with the little velvet box years later. Tonight it felt like a battlefield, not a bistro. Sarah, it's our anniversary. His voice was flat, and that stung more than any open argument could. Right, of course. 10 years. That should be something, right? I looked around. The same red checkered tablecloths, the same Sinatra crooning softly, the same damn couple staring into each other's eyes like it was their first date, not their 100th. A wave of nausea hit me, so strong I had to swallow hard. This wasn't supposed to feel like this. Something in the mailbox had caught my eye this morning, a letter, shoved amidst the bills. My stomach clenched. I knew that handwriting. Eric, Paris. Memories I thought I'd buried years ago came crashing back. Summer nights, hot kisses, that feeling of being so damn alive. Michael was the safe choice, the sensible one after Eric ghosted me for a modeling gig in Milan. Practical me won that round, didn't it? Yet, lately, a restlessness clawed at me. Suburbia, work, the slow tick of the clock toward some vague future, it was choking me. I caught Michael staring and forced a smile. God, how long had it been since his gaze actually made my pulse quicken? Then there's Jake. Jake from work, with his easy laugh and questions about my life outside the spreadsheets. He sees the Sarah that Michael seems to have forgotten even exists. My phone buzzed in my purse. I bet I knew who that was. My fingers twitched to check it, but Michael's eyes were on me. Guilt and a defiant thrill twisted in my gut. You okay? Michael's question sounded rote, like he was going through the motions. Just tired, I lied, knowing the real exhaustion had nothing to do with sleep. He nodded, that tired sigh again, then took over ordering our usual. That was our problem, wasn't it? 10 years and we'd become so damned usual. The food arrived, the same dishes we always ordered, and I poked at them, appetite gone. You've barely eaten. Seriously, are you feeling all right? Michael asked, a hint of concern finally seeping through the routine. Stress. Work's a mess. Technically, a half-truth. The mess, though, was mostly in my head. I stared at my untouched pasta, seeing Rome's cobblestones instead, my skin flushed under the Italian sun. A life where, sensible, wasn't the highest praise. Maybe a vacation? Get away for a bit? That spark in his eyes was new. Like where? My voice came out sharper than I intended. Rome screamed in my head, but what I said was, a cruise. An all-inclusive? I don't think that's quite my speed, Michael. He blinked, confused, and the spark in his eyes dimmed. I nearly choked on the guilt, but buried it in irritation instead. He couldn't even try to understand anymore. That night I lay in bed, Michael's even breathing beside me the only sound. Moonlight glinted off Eric's letter, tucked under my pillow. Sleep evaded me. On my phone, unread messages waited. Decisions. Just one drink, Sarah. To celebrate the end of the quarter, nothing major. The lie rolled off my tongue smoothly, a smile plastered on my face. Michael nodded, that flicker of hope in his eyes returning. Damn if it didn't make a spike of guilt twist in my gut. Truth was, I was celebrating a whole different kind of victory tonight. Jake waited in that dimly lit wine bar, the one I suggested because Michael would hate its too trendy vibe. The anticipation swirled in my stomach, a mix of nerves and something more dangerous, excitement? Relief? Whatever it wasn't something I dared look too closely at. I changed in the office restroom, ditching my sensible pantsuit for something bolder. The silk dress clung in all the right places, and in the mirror, I saw a glimmer of the girl I used to be, the one Jake saw. A text buzzed. Him. Table by the window? My heart did a quick double beat. The lies got easier each time. Migraine, I told Michael, forcing a grimace. Think I'll head straight to bed. He patted my arm, a mix of sympathy and disappointment. It should have stung. It didn't. Walking into the bar, Jake's smile did something crazy to my insides. Stupid, really. He was young, probably messy, and this whole thing was destined to blow up in my face spectacularly. But damn, after years of feeling invisible, the attention was intoxicating. Sarah, he stood, pulling me in for a hug that sent a jolt down my spine. You look amazing. Just like that, the doubts melted away. Hours blurred. The wine flowed, the conversation too. With Michael, it was always surface stuff: work, the house, logistics. With Jake, it was like something inside me unfurled. We talked about dreams, regrets, stupid inside jokes that made me laugh until tears streamed down my face. And all the while, the secret thrummed beneath the surface, the knowledge that this was so wrong, and that's exactly why it felt so good. Back home, I tiptoed to the bathroom, heart pounding. Stripping off the dress felt like shedding a second skin. In the mirror, though, my eyes were haunted. This wasn't some fling. I was playing with fire, and deep down I knew it. Sliding into bed beside Michael, his warmth so familiar, I nearly sobbed with shame. But another thought crept in. When was the last time I'd felt so alive? The next few weeks became an addictive blur. Excuses piled on excuses. Late nights at the office turned into lingering dinners. Drinks after the gym transformed into secretive walks. I became a master of deception, a new skill added to my damn resume. The guilt was always there, a low throb, but I squashed it with justifications. Michael was oblivious, I was careful, and Jake made me forget everything else mattered. One afternoon, Emily texted, "Coffee ASAP? I'm worried." My heart lurched. She'd always had a knack for seeing right through me. It was the one thread I couldn't control. I texted back a lame excuse and felt the guilt spike again. Friendship, duty, sanity, they all seemed hazy next to Jake's easy laugh and the fire in his eyes when he looked at me. The alarm buzzed, and the first coherent thought in my head was, God, I can't do this anymore. Not work, not the house, not this, whatever this life had become. Michael, beside me, stirred and mumbled something in his sleep. I closed my eyes, pretending it was Jake's name I heard. The lies were suffocating me. They came automatically now, weaving a tangled web so thick I was tripping over the threads myself. Small slip-ups gnawed at me. Forgotten errands, stories changing mid-sentence when Michael asked too many questions. He seemed oblivious, but fear tightened like a noose. It was only a matter of time before he caught on. My phone had become a ticking time bomb. Deleting Jake's messages was a nightly ritual filled with a mix of terror and defiance. One wrong swipe, one moment of carelessness, and my whole charade would implode. There were close calls. An almost missed message while showing Michael a funny dog video, a muffled ringtone as I pretended to dig through my purse in the grocery store. Each time my blood ran cold, and afterward I'd lash out, blaming Michael and his comfortable predictability for my need to escape. Talking to Jake helped. I couldn't admit the mess I was in, of course, but I wove stories of a suffocating marriage and a neglectful husband, making myself into the victim, justifying everything. Jake bought it, stroking my ego with sympathy and sweet little encouragements. It was pathetic, and I knew it, but damned if it didn't make me feel better. Sometimes the guilt hammered me. Seeing Michael smile, knowing he was planning a romantic weekend getaway while I was plotting secret rendezvous with Jake, filled me with such self-loathing I wanted to scream. I'd scan him for signs, a flicker of suspicion, a hint of doubt. Nothing, just that same easy trust that now felt like an accusation. My promotion should have been a moment to celebrate. I'd worked my ass off. Yet, all I felt was a hollow echo of, what's the point? Telling Michael twisted something in my stomach. His pride, his genuine happiness for me, made me want to crawl into a hole. The line I'd drawn in my head blurred more with each passing day. Late lunches with Jake turned into strolls through the park, his hand brushing mine, a lingering look escalating the tension deliciously. I knew, with a certainty that scared me, that it wouldn't stay innocent forever. The question was, did I even want it to? One evening, Michael sat me down, his brow furrowed. Sarah, seriously, talk to me. Is everything okay? The concern in his voice, the damn genuine care, sent a jolt of shame through me. Before I could answer, Emily's name popped up in a text notification. I froze. If there was ever a time to confess, this was it. To rebuild, start over, maybe find a way back to the person I was supposed to be. The words formed on my tongue, but then fear, and Jake's intoxicating promises, squeezed them back down my throat. It's nothing, honestly. Just work stress, I managed to say. Another lie. And maybe, I realized, the most dangerous one yet. I wasn't just lying to Michael anymore. I was lying to myself. The moment I found the receipt was gone, I knew. My stomach dropped like a stone. The delicate scrap of paper, proof of my secret indulgence, was damning evidence. Michael had seen it. Now, it was a waiting game. Fear warred with a defiant anger. How dare he snoop? Yet, mixed in was a prickle of guilt. I'd practically painted a target on my back, hadn't I? The silence was the worst. Each creak of the floorboards, every time he cleared his throat, sent adrenaline coursing through me. Did he know? Was he waiting to confront me? The questions ate away at me. His stoic, hurt face haunted my nightmares. With Emily, it got worse. She surprised me with a coffee on my lunch break. Her concerned gaze scanned my too tight smile. "Can we just talk, honestly, Sarah?" she asked. Panic flared. I couldn't deal with this, not now, and my reaction was a pathetic lashing out disguised as irritation. "Honestly, Em, I'm swamped at work, Michael's being demanding, and I just need a minute to breathe." Her eyes widened, then a flicker of hurt passed before she shut down. Another casualty of my lies, another bridge burned. Back at home, the paranoia escalated. Was Michael monitoring my every move? It wouldn't have been unlike the old him, the organized, type accountant. But this new, wounded Michael, he scared me in a different way. It fueled a twisted justification. His snooping only proved my unhappiness, didn't it? See, Jake was right. This was no marriage, just a prison with a mortgage. The problem was, I couldn't stop checking my phone, the secrecy turning into an obsession. Michael watched, I knew it. His eyes followed me as I scurried to the bathroom with it, the way I flinched if he got too close to my bag. His silence only fueled my own narrative, the controlling husband, watching his wife wither. Then, a credit card bill arrived. Pages of normalcy. Then a charge that made my blood turn cold. A boutique hotel I'd been to with Jake. That's all it would take, one conversation, one slip up, and it would be over. Michael the meticulous would connect the dots, lay it all bare. And then what? The thought of the confrontation, the hurt, made me want to be sick. But so did the thought of giving up Jake. We'd crossed a line recently, a line I wasn't sure I ever wanted to step back over. His touch, the excitement, it was like a lifeline to something wild and vibrant inside me that I'd forgotten existed. The rational part of my brain whispered warnings, told me this would end in disaster. Yet, even as I scrolled through the hotel charges again, a new and desperate thought took hold. Maybe this was how I escaped my prison after all. That hotel? The Beaumont? There's a charge on your card. What was that for? Michael's question hit me like a gut punch. I'd grown careless, forgetting the shared credit card, the stupid trail of breadcrumbs I'd left. Work, meeting. I didn't think to put it on my expense account. I sputtered, the lie forming even as I knew how flimsy it was. His eyes, always so trusting, had gone flinty. A shard of panic ripped through me, but I shoved it down. That night, as Michael went through the motions of normal life, dinner, some mindless TV show, I saw it clearly. He wasn't buying it. The doubt had taken root, the poison of my betrayal seeping in. Part of me wanted to confess, to beg for a chance to rebuild, but shame twisted with a defiant sort of glee. Hadn't he driven me to this? The next day, Michael left for his regular weekly consulting trip. Or so he said. My hands trembled as I texted Jake, a surge of reckless excitement coursing through me. Now, with Michael gone, I could be more daring, more open with Jake. This was my chance at freedom, at happiness, and no flicker of doubt could stop me now. But as I lingered over my outfit, a touch more provocative than usual, an echo of Michael's face as he left haunted me. Had it been sadness in his eyes or something else? I brushed it away, blaming my guilt-ridden imagination. The whispers, I learned, had a life of their own. Emily hadn't just confided in a friend, she was dropping hints left and right. My usual lunch crew was suddenly awkward, a pitying look in their eyes I couldn't ignore. Whispers followed me down the office corridors, the word, affair, hanging unspoken in the air. Panic flared each time the phone rang, each unknown number on the caller ID a potential discovery. Yet, the fear was overpowered by the thrill. Jake fueled it. He listened, flattered my ego, painted a picture of a future built just for us. He was everything Michael wasn't. Or so I believed. Then, the envelope arrived. Thick, unassuming. Inside were photos, me and Jake, laughing, kissing, him leaving my house late at night. A detailed log of times, places, damning proof laid out like a police report. And with it, a note from Michael's lawyer. Let's discuss a separation agreement. The world tilted on its axis. Michael, meticulous, heartbroken Michael, had been playing me. He knew, the whole damn time, and he'd been gathering his arsenal, trapping me in my own lies. Panic gave way to a strange cold fury. How dare he, after everything I'd done for him, sacrificed for this boring life? It morphed into a kind of determination. I wasn't going down without a fight. This was war now, and I wasn't about to surrender. You don't get it, you were never there for me. The accusation, raw and bitter, hung in the air. Michael flinched, something shifting in the set of his shoulders. And there it was, my weapon, the victim narrative I'd crafted so carefully. Yet, under his quiet rage, I saw something else in Michael's eyes, a deep, fracturing pain. The realization hit me like a physical blow. These weren't lines in a play, this was our life, and I was the one destroying it. But it was too late. The argument raged on. Old hurts, unspoken resentments, were flung about like broken glass. Every word cut deeper, but a defiant sort of numbness had settled over me. Then he asked it, the question I dreaded. Who is he? My defiance fractured, and for a second, I was almost tempted to tell the truth. To reveal Jake for the flimsy, ego-boosting distraction he was. Instead, panic twisted through me. Losing Michael was one thing. Jake represented escape, a future, a chance to build the life I thought I deserved. I couldn't lose that too. So I lied. Someone from work. It doesn't matter who. The words felt like ash on my tongue. Michael stared, then let out a raw, broken laugh. Doesn't matter? Sarah, look at us. He swept his arm around the kitchen, once the heart of our home, now a battlefield strewn with the detritus of our life. My work trip was a lie, Sarah. I saw you, with him. His voice cracked. The sight of Michael, usually so composed, disintegrating in front of me was both terrifying and vindicating. I told you, you never made me happy. I spat back, the words fueled by years of self-constructed justification. He just shook his head, and something in me withered at the utter despair on his face. Get out. It wasn't a scream, barely a whisper, yet that quiet dismissal shattered me. Just get out. The world turned into a blur after that. Packing became a robotic exercise, a pathetic attempt to create some sort of order out of the utter chaos I'd created. Each discarded sweater, each framed photo, felt like another piece of myself unraveling. Standing on the doorstep, suitcase in hand, I realized the fantasy of freedom felt oddly hollow. It wasn't just Michael the first was leaving, it was the safety of the familiar, the life I'd built even if it had become a suffocating cage. Michael didn't even look at me as I walked out, his silence was the loudest condemnation of all. And there it was, the truth I'd run from. There was no glorious escape, just a messy aftermath created by my own hands. Where did I even go from here? Who was I now, without the role of wife, the comforting illusion of our perfect life? As the door clicked shut behind me, I stood trembling, utterly alone. Volume _up. The knock on Jake's door was as desperate as I felt. There was nowhere else to go. His smile when he saw me faltered, replaced with a flicker of, was that concern, or something colder? It didn't matter. I needed him, the promise of escape he represented. His apartment was shockingly small, messy in a way mine had never been. Clothes strewn across a worn couch, a half-eaten takeout container on the coffee table. This wasn't the life I'd pictured, but I shoved the disappointment aside. I needed comfort, distraction, someone to make me forget the wreckage I'd left behind. Yet, instead of pulling me into the passionate embrace I'd imagined, Jake held back. Sarah, this is a lot. Are you sure you're okay? His words dripped with unease, not the unwavering devotion I craved. A coldness crept in, seeping through my desperation. Everything in Jake's apartment shouted, temporary, unserious, a stark contrast to the life I'd lost. Had I been a fool? Was this all it had ever been, a fling, built on lies and stolen moments? That's when the first sob escaped me, guttural and ugly. Jake awkwardly patted my shoulder, his touch tentative. There, it's gonna be okay. But the emptiness in his voice was impossible to ignore. The next few days were a blur of takeout food, cheap wine, and Jake's growing detachment. His initial excitement waned as reality set in. My messy divorce, the loss of our social circle, became burdens he wasn't willing to bear. His absences grew longer, excuses flimsier. The night he didn't come home at all, I knew. My glorious escape hatch was nothing but a flimsy illusion that crumbled at the slightest pressure. Word of the separation reached Emily like wildfire. One evening, I found her name on my phone's caller ID. I hadn't spoken to her in months. With a shaking hand, I hit answer. Her voice was hesitant, a mix of anger, pity, and something surprisingly like understanding. "I don't agree with what you did, Sarah," she said, her voice firm. "But I know what pain feels like." She offered to meet, to talk. Her words held an awkward sort of lifeline, a reminder I wasn't completely alone. Michael was untouchable. He'd become a fortress of frosty lawyers and precise paperwork, communicating only through legal jargon that shredded my remaining illusions of civility. It was a battle now, and I was ill-equipped. Each demand, each asset listed on a spreadsheet, was a knife twisting into an already wounded heart. The loneliness was a crushing weight. Nights were the worst. Wine-fueled attempts to drown out the regrets led to tearful, unanswered calls to old friends, forgotten texts to Michael that I deleted each morning with burning shame. Then, the final blow. An invoice arrived, the private investigator's fee. An obscene amount staring back at me, a stark reminder of the price of my lies. Michael, as always, was chillingly efficient. He wasn't just cutting me out of his life, he was ensuring there would be a financial cost for my actions. Despair closed in, and the bottle I'd been nursing beckoned with tempting oblivion. My new apartment felt like a prison cell. Cramped, the cheap furniture mocking the spacious home I'd lost. The smell of stale takeout and cheap cleaning supplies hung heavy in the air, the scent of my new life. Sleep became the enemy. Nights stretched into agonizing marathons of self-recrimination. Each creak of the floorboards, each siren echoing in the distance, became an accusation. What if I'd tried harder? What if I'd talked to Michael? What if I wasn't the monster I was becoming? Social media was my perverse addiction. I scrolled through Michael's feed obsessively. Photos of him smiling, genuinely happy, and always with Emily beside him, cut deeper than any divorce decree could. Their happiness was broadcast to the world, a constant taunt reminding me I was the architect of my own misery. Aunt Lisa's birthday invitation sat on my fridge, a beacon of hopeful normalcy. I craved the sight of my niece's smile, the warmth of family, yet shame held me back. They likely blamed me for everything, whispered behind my back. The thought of their pity, or worse, their contempt, was unbearable. So I made up a lame excuse, letting another connection wither. The job I managed to land was a brutal comedown. Gone were the power suits and corner offices. I now wore a scratchy polo shirt with a name tag, assisting grumpy customers in a discount electronics store. Coworkers, sensing my desperation, offered pitying smiles or whispered gossip, their eyes avid with curiosity about the scandal. Humiliation gnawed at me with each passing hour. The news of Michael and Emily's engagement hit like an earthquake. My phone slipped from my hand, the screen cracking in a cruel metaphor for my crumbling life. It shouldn't have been a shock. It was logical, even sweet. Yet I felt as if I'd been punched in the gut. This was it, the final nail in the coffin of the life I'd thrown away. That night, despair fueled by cheap vodka, I committed the ultimate act of pathetic self-destruction. I drove to Michael's house. In the darkness, their home, once ours, glowed with warmth. Their laughter floated through an open window. I imagined them curled on the sofa, their life unfolding in the perfect, simple way I had sabotaged. A strangled sob tore itself from my throat. This was me now, a ghost haunting the edges of a life I'd shattered. The next morning, I awoke on my worn couch to a crushing headache and soul-deep shame. The apartment looked even more squalid in the harsh daylight, a reflection of the wreckage I'd become. Staring at myself in the cracked bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. This was rock bottom. And yet, amid the wreckage, a flicker of something cold and clear emerged. This wasn't just despair, it was a decision point. I could let this break me entirely, descend further into self-destruction, become the pathetic caricature I was well on my way to embodying. Or, I could try to claw my way back towards some kind of sanity, even if it meant a long, grueling climb from the depths. Volume_up. I think I need help. The admission hung in the sterile air of the therapist's office, heavy with shame. This woman, Dr. Evans, with her kind eyes and unnervingly neutral expression, was now privy to the ugly mess I'd made of my life. The first session was a blur of tears and fragmented confessions. I poured out my story, the dissatisfaction, the affair, the implosion of my marriage. Words I once couldn't even think to myself spilled out, each one an indictment of my weakness, my selfishness. Dr. Evans listened, asked probing questions, and I hated her for it. Hated myself even more. The following weeks were brutal. Therapy was an exercise in soul-deep excavation. We unearthed the roots of my discontent. Insecurities I'd buried years ago, resentments left to fester, my tendency to blame everyone but myself. Ugly truths I'd once skillfully evaded were now brutally illuminated. The worst part was confronting my justifications for the affair. Dr. Evans forced me to dismantle them, brick by brick. Michael wasn't a villain, just a normal man with flaws. My unhappiness wasn't his sole responsibility. And Jake was nothing but a flimsy life raft I'd clung to out of pure desperation. One evening, driven by a raw need for some kind of absolution, I sat down and wrote a letter. To Michael. It wasn't an apology, because those felt cheapened. It was an acknowledgement of the pain I'd caused, a brutally honest self-assessment with no requests for forgiveness or understanding. Just a need to articulate the destruction I'd left in my wake. I didn't send it, but the mere act felt like laying down a heavy, toxic burden. Desperation propelled me to volunteer at the local animal shelter. My initial motivation was pure selfishness, needing something, anything, to fill the gaping void in my life. But the animals proved an unexpected salvation. Their need was pure, their trust humbling. Cleaning cages, walking scared dogs, I felt a sense of purpose that had been absent far too long. Walking into that shelter one afternoon, I froze. It was Emily, unloading bags of donated pet food. For a terrifying moment, we just stared. The air crackled with unspoken words. Then, in a move that surprised us both, she took a step towards me. The conversation wasn't comfortable. Our voices were low, avoiding the curiosity of nearby volunteers. There was still pain in her eyes, justified anger. Yet, the venom was gone. We spoke as two women connected by a broken past, both awkwardly trying to navigate its fallout. Forgiveness wasn't on the table, but neither was the need for theatrical dramatics. A strange feeling settled in me, not peace, but the tiniest sliver of acceptance. News of Jake, ever the cockroach, resurfaced through the whispers of old acquaintances. Apparently, he'd moved on, now gracing Sarah 2.0 with his charming attentions. The pang of hurt was surprisingly muted, replaced by a sense of ironic amusement and, yes, even liberation. Now, I saw him for exactly what he'd been, a symptom, not the cure, of my discontent. Sitting alone in my bleak apartment one night, a surge of something akin to defiance hit me. No more wallowing. No more drunken nights lost in regret. With trembling hands, I searched the community college website. I enrolled in an introductory business course, the first small step towards building a future less focused on what I'd lost, more on what I might perhaps still salvage. The woman at the checkout smiled at me as she scanned my groceries. Or did she look more like pity? Hard to believe it's been 5 years, isn't it? She asked, a bit too brightly. 5 years. Since Michael's name had been splashed across the tabloids, since whispers followed me down aisles. Sometimes it felt like yesterday, the sting of humiliation still raw. Other times, like now, my old life hovered at the edges of memory, almost like a bad dream. There were still days that hit hard. Birthdays, anniversaries, the scent of freshly baked bread that instantly transported me back to our old kitchen. But the crippling self-loathing had faded, replaced by the dull ache of regret, and, oddly, a kind of cautious gratitude. I was a different person now. Not better, not healed, but evolved. The broken pieces rearranged into a less glamorous, yet more honest mosaic. Therapy had continued, morphing from crisis management into a tool for self-understanding. I learned my triggers, my tendency towards escapism when life got hard. The world looked less black and white. I saw my part in my marriage's implosion, saw Michael more clearly, not as a villain or a victim, just a flawed man who had deserved better than what I'd offered. My new job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I rented a slightly less depressing apartment and cautiously rebuilt friendships damaged by my self-absorbed spiral. There was even a man, Jason, kind, steady, the opposite of Jake in every way. The relationship was fragile, budding from tentative coffee dates into something hesitant and surprisingly sweet. I was terrified of messing it up, my capacity for destruction always lurking in the back of my mind. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with Michael's name. An automated photo update. He was with Emily, at their favorite beach spot, both of them beaming. A pang of envy shot through me, quickly dampened by a surprising warmth. He did look, well, happy. It was proof that healing was possible, even if it took messy paths. Then, the entirely unexpected, a wedding invitation. Michael and Emily. My first instinct was to chuck it in the trash, unopened. But the wiser part of me won. I sat with it, feeling its weight, knowing this was another test I needed to pass. I wouldn't go, of course. Some wounds needed time and distance to heal properly. But simply receiving this, letting it exist without triggering a meltdown, felt like a victory. The promotion was small, barely noticeable on my paycheck. Yet, I celebrated alone with a decent bottle of wine and takeout from the hole-in-the-wall Thai place whose spicy noodles had fueled many late-night work sessions. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned, not even close. But, finally, it was a life I had built, not one I had stumbled into, or worse, had mindlessly destroyed. Walking home that night, crisp fall air swirling around me, I felt something that surprised me. Peace. Not the bubbly happiness of fairy tales, but a quiet acceptance. My mistakes were still part of me, scars that would never fully fade. But I liked who I was becoming, resilient, flawed, tentatively hopeful. The future was a blank page, and for the first time in a long, long time, the uncertainty felt less like a threat and more like a